record on this computer. Yay. Okay. So this is one of the AMAs that we're doing this year. An AMA is a term borrowed from Reddit. It stands for Ask Me Anything. We've done a bunch in the past on a lot of more public health, social health kind of related career pathways. So whether it's dentistry, public health, nursing, education, social work. And today we're really excited to open it up to a little bit more of a broader category and talk about what post-grad life is like at UCSF and also kind of that trajectory and that whole experience. I know everyone's story is unique, and so we are so excited to be able to highlight each of your stories. And a huge shout out to Cristian for writing such amazing and tailored questions. We really appreciate it. So I would like for our staff to introduce ourselves, and then we will have our speakers introduce ourselves. So my name is Julia. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm one of the EOP advisors here at SF State. My background is not in STEM. I'm a genocide studies major and an education major as well for my master's. So learning all about STEM and public health and the whole health world has been new for me since I started at SF State, and it's been a really powerful journey just to meet you all and to help my students get to where they want to go, especially in this world. So thank you for coming.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cristian. I'm also not in STEM. I majored in English and higher education. This is my first year at EOP, working at SF State. I came back from living in LA for a few years, so I'm back home in my city, San Francisco. And it's just been a good experience to be able to work with students from all over, especially first-gen students, being recent grad, understanding what that whole feeling of what now and what path you're supposed to take. So I'm glad we have students here who are able to learn from all you. And then even just learning a little bit about each one of you. Not gonna lie, I did some deep dive searches into everyone, and your a little Google search went a long way. And you guys are all very impressive, but at the same time, very real and honest people. And I think that like students can learn a lot from that. That it's not just what it seems, and there's a lot of like background and depth into people and how they got to where they are. So thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Viclarie Lozoya. I am a senior here at San Francisco State. I am also president of Latinas in STEM, and I am really happy to have you guys here because, I mean, coming from the Central Valley, super small, and being first generation, and then seeing your guys' stories and like reading all of it was really inspiring. So I'm glad you guys are here to talk and inspire other students and give us like the rundown on like support and what we can do to make it to where you guys did. Thank you.
A huge thing that we noticed when we were planning this post-grad workshop series is that a lot of students go through that post-grad depression, usually starting in senior year and oftentimes hitting that high point after graduation. And the whole point of the series was to help that transition, so it's hopefully not as scary. And I know that a lot of students right now are kind of at that point where they're figuring out, well, what comes next, right? How do I even begin this next chapter? And when we talk to students about graduate programs or about schools beyond San Francisco, beyond the CSU, honestly, students get really anxious, right? They're like, I don't know anyone who went to graduate school and I don't know if I'm good enough. UCSF, what? Don't you know that's the #1 research university in the country? Why would I apply there, right? So we're so grateful for you all for being here and helping us talk a little bit more about your unique experiences kind of battling all of that. So the first question, Cristian and I will rotate. So the first question we have is for each of you. Can you each introduce yourselves and then talk to us a little bit about your experience as a first-gen student navigating this post-grad journey. So we'd like to start with Luis.
Yeah, thanks for hosting this. Yeah, my name is Luis Santiago. I'm originally from LA. My whole family is from Mexico, so I'm first gen. They all landed in South Central LA, like around Compton. So yeah, being first gen in STEM overall, it's pretty isolating. Because I mean you're kind of pursuing this kind of dream about science and it's so abstract to your family, you know. You can always like explain that you're like doing medicine or something, but they think you're gonna be a doctor. So it's pretty tough. And the main kind of like way I found my way is like finding a community of support. Like people, other first gen people like me, mentors, who don't really always kind of look like me, but they believe that I have potential, you know, that they can, that I'll be something one day, or you know, they believe like in supporting students. And so that's like the main kind of drive that's like gotten me to where I am now. And I try to reciprocate that now, now that I kind of have all this information on how I got here. So yeah.
Nabeela, did you want to go?
Can you hear me fine? Okay, thank you. My name is Nabeela Ariqat. I'm a first year MD PhD program. I'm technically on a leave of absence at this moment because of personal family stuff and mental health and all this. And we can dive deeper into that later on. But I guess as a first generation student, I actually wasn't gonna go to college. I thought once you graduated, my parents just wanted me to get married and then, you know, just do what fit in the culture. I actually ran away, went to college. It was very like confusing because I was like, okay, I'm here. What do you do now? No idea. I just remember every day, like my first day, I cried so much in college because I was like, what do I do? I'm here, but it's so confusing. No one went to college. None of my family members finished high school. So it's very confusing. The way I navigated is very similar to Luis. I actually joined SACNAS in undergrad, and I found a lot of people who looked like me, who were like older than me, not necessarily in age, but in terms of their time in college, like either seniors or juniors, and they were very helpful throughout my journey, which is why I'm still in SACNAS now. But without them, I don't think I would have made it. There's one professor that actually prevented me from dropping out of college. He was very supportive through, actually too, like for SACNAS, like he funded, like donated all the time to them, like funded a lot of their workshops and everything. I was like, okay, maybe he seems to care. So I had him and he basically told me, I believe in you, like you can do it. No one else did. And he did tell me that. And so like, I was like, you know what, I can do it. And so I just kind of pushed myself and found like mentorship around me, either people who looked like me, even if not people who didn't look like me, but were very supportive of my goals and my trajectories from, I guess, my education. Didn't really have any at the beginning, but later on they built up. But yeah, that's about it, being first gen. Very hard, very hard. So pat yourself on the back. Like, it's a hard thing. Yeah, give yourself a hug. I like that.
Miguel?
Yeah, hi, my name is Miguel. I'm a PhD student at UCSF, as most of us are here. I'm also an SF State alum. I graduated in 2020. I got a shout out SF State. But yeah, I mean, I honestly didn't even know I wanted to go to grad school till my senior year. And I think in a lot of ways, I kind of shaped my journey and when I was just really lucky in the sense of like, I didn't really have any interest to be in science when I started my undergrad. Like most of us, I just was more thinking that I'll get a degree and then figure out what to do with it afterwards. As well as living in this amazing but expensive city. You know, I was working like 30 hours a week while being a full-time student. And so I think for me, like on top of like not even knowing what you don't know, like I also didn't even have the time to learn to know what I didn't know. And so I was really thankful that And really, I think what started this whole journey of me getting into science and research was actually seeing an ad for a summer program on Twitter that I just decided to join. I credit my journey to science all the time as just seeing an ad on Twitter, which is kind of funny when you think about it. And when I applied for it, I got in and I got put into the lab that I ended up staying in for my undergrad. And my mentor, who's not at SF State anymore, unfortunately, Rory Ross, she's now at the University of Oregon, but she yeah, shout out U of O, Jasmine, it's from there. But she was one that really just advocated for me to be like to like apply for these internships, to like not feel discouraged to apply to grad school. Like she was the one who like didn't want me to limit myself. And I think when you're just around people like that, it's just really infectious, you know? And I feel like it's something that I've taken with me now for the rest of my life, is not being afraid to apply to anything, because at the end of the day, the worst that you'll get is just a no. And that doesn't, you know, necessarily value to your worth. It's just, you know, a no at that moment. But, you know, if you're really persistent, I think you can do anything you want to do. And again, I think too, while I wasn't really directly involved as much in SACNAS at SF State during my time there, I still was like in an amazing community in terms of the research environment I was in, where like there was not like a single, like there was not a single white person in my lab. And in fact, like I was pretty much like in a woman-dominated lab. Like I was just in a lab full of amazing women of color scientists who I still have deep community with to this day. And I think being in a community like that was just very infectious as well, and something I wanted to bring to UCSF.
I love the recurring themes of when we're first gen, we really don't have the roads paved for us. And I like to tell the story of how I was 18 before I met a Southeast Asian American woman who held a master's or a PhD. And I didn't know that people who look like me could even work in higher education, not to mention be the freaking professor, right? And so when you're sharing your stories, I think a lot about how representation is really important, and also having advocates, and also having a little bit of that courage, right? Of where you're taking the leap somewhere, you're crossing the road that no one else that you know has ever crossed before. So thank you for sharing all that. And then Jasmine, I would love for you to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine. I'm a second-year PhD student at UCSF. Yeah, so I definitely want to echo a lot of what everyone said, which is just generally it is rough. If you don't meet the right people or get the right support, it's very easy for you to like kind of get lost in everything that is college. For me, I think I started out very ambitious, but I didn't know how to, like, what to do. So I like was thinking of going to medical school at first. So the first 2 years, I was like, okay, I'm pre-med. I just know I have to get good grades and like shadow and stuff. But it was kind of all very like confusing. And then college was very hard for me because I went to a very small high school. And I did really well in my high school, but it was like that high school could only give me so many resources, right? And then I was going to school with people who were like, we're gonna be like sophomores, like their first year, right? So it was very rough. And then at some point I thought about more like what I wanted to do. So then I decided actually, what else can I do with this biology degree? Like I like biology, I like what I'm studying, but like what can I do with this? And so then towards the end of my my last 2 years, I decided to try to explore more about research. The timing, so this is kind of an accident, but it ended up what ended up happening kind of on accident is that I decided to study abroad in a STEM-based program that had a language requirement. And I had been studying German for fun for like 7+ years at that point. Yes. So what happened to be going to study abroad in Germany. And I decided, well, while I'm here, like learning the language and yeah, like why not try to get research experience abroad? And it worked out for me. I did a couple internships and I was hooked. Like I love research. I came back, did more research. And I knew like that I wanted to get a PhD then. But yeah, without again having like amazing mentors then, like both in Germany and when I came back. And then I took 2 gap years to just do more research and like just basically be better prepared for grad school. But yeah, without the mentors and the people I met and their support, I don't think I would have done a PhD. Who knows what I would have done, to be honest. Yeah.
I think that because most people think you're supposed to have everything figured out, especially, in college, right? And then after college, like you're going to figure out and know exactly what the rest of your life is going to look like. You're going to stay in one field. And when we don't have that stability or that full understanding of what comes next, that existential crisis creeps in, right?
All right, and then so we're gonna talk about now imposter syndrome, something that we might have all gone through before, especially as first gen and students of color. How have each of you dealt with feelings of doubt or inadequacy throughout your academic careers? What advice would you give to students who may be experiencing those same feelings or challenges? And we can go in the same order. So, Luis, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, for sure. I've dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome, but I've learned a lot of skills to get through it. My parents are separated, and neither of them kind of got even a high school education. So high school was extremely challenging for me. I finished high school with a 2.4 GPA, and then I went to Cal State. And then right when I started at Cal State Northridge, my dad got really, really sick, and I had to take in addition to taking classes and part-time jobs, I had to take care of my dad too. So my college just like tanked. I ended up graduating with like a 2.6 GPA from Cal State Northridge. But I mean, I was so passionate about science. But I mean, you kind of like, I mean, my peers, they're all so smart and they did pretty well in school. So it was cool that we're interested in the same thing, but there's like a huge gap in where they're kind of finishing than I am. So I kind of dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome at that point. And so I also took gap years. I wanted to go to grad school. I knew I kind of wanted to pursue science and not so much medicine. But I didn't. I applied to grad schools and I got rejected from like 12 or like 13 schools or something like that. And I then applied to postbacks and like jobs and in science, and it just didn't work out. So I was like, my friends were going to grad school, so I just ended up going to like working in industry at the pharmaceutical company, kind of out of just like nothing else to do. And I kind of felt really bad, I was like, yeah, shout out Cal State Northridge, yeah. And I felt really bad, and I felt like I wasn't at the same level that my peers were. But I mean, I was so passionate about science, and I did really well at that pharmaceutical company. And I kind of like brought my stuff I had learned. I did computational research in undergrad, and I applied that stuff outside of my work, like outside of my position into my work. And it was like super novel, and no one really done it in my job before. And I was the only Mexican there. This was in Wisconsin. So it's pretty kind of crazy that it ended up working out really well. And then from there, I applied to grad school again. Yeah, cheese curds, I do miss them dearly. And after with that experience, I actually got accepted to all the grad schools I applied to out of that. So it's kind of weird because I had dealt with all this imposter syndrome up to that one point, and then I was like, oh, like, what was I kind of like? Why was I stressing so hard? Why did I feel so bad if I was doing so well, So it's like you kind of like feel like you're down in the dumps, like when you can compare yourself, I guess. And it's so easy to compare yourself, like even if it's just your friends talking about grades and stuff like that in college. But you can't really do that because I guess everyone has their own kind of like personal stuff and like kind of things going on. And my biggest advice is like not to compare yourself to like people that are like even in the same like interests and stuff like that. Like everyone, there's not one way to do something, you know. Now I'm at UCSF, and I never would have thought I'd end up here. And I could have easily chosen anywhere else. And it's kind of crazy that it all kind of led up to that, but I didn't recognize it when I was going through all that kind of like, it felt like I was treading water, you know, not going anywhere, but I actually was, you know, just like putting work in. So yeah, so, and I mean, I wish I had known then that I could kind of like believe my mentors that I was doing okay and stuff like that when they would tell me. But I mean, you just kind of you don't always listen when you're kind of an undergrad going through these things. So yeah, that's my biggest advice. Like try not to compare yourself because it's really not worth any effort. So
Thank you so much for sharing. I definitely agree. I think one of our hugest enemies will be comparison in college, and especially when you feel like any sort of break or non-motion is seen as negative or kind of like a waste of time. I think when students begin to really accept that they're on their own path and at their own time is when they really begin to thrive and reach those levels of pure joy in their passions and their careers. Nabeela?
Very similar to like Luis. I had a hard time comparing myself to everything and everyone. I entered college yet again. My mom didn't finish. What was her last year of school? 6th grade was her last year of school. So like, and then my dad didn't finish much either. And so like, I always thought like, oh, what am I supposed to do? Like, should I even go to college? Should I go there? Went to college. Everyone came in like with a major and everything. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. I remember like getting one of the lowest like grades in my first I think it was calculus class. I had never taken pre-calc or anything. I don't know why they put me in there. They set me up for failure. That's basically what I decided after years of trauma, after realizing that traumatic experience. I just remember once I got my grades back after my first quarter of college, I like screamed in my pillow. No one was in my dorm. I lived in a triple, still overpriced. Let's not talk about that. But I lived in a triple, and so like no one was there, and I just screamed and I was like, I just want to make my mom proud. That's all. And I remember someone knocking at the door, like, "Are you okay?" And I just kept comparing myself. The way I kind of like pulled myself out of that was thinking about where I came from, thinking about my background, thinking about like I'm trying my best. It is true. I wasn't as kind to myself back then. I kind of probably talked myself down a bit, but I still like had that idea, like I'm doing the best I can. I never took calc. I never did this. I never did that. It's okay. And I was also working full time. So I was like sleeping maybe 2-3 hours a day. So it was just very difficult to like handle everything. And I was like, why be mean to yourself? Like, there's nothing what's comparing gonna do? So I kind of just like put little shields up right here. I'm like, don't compare. I still did it. It's very, very, very hard not to compare yourself. It still happens, but like self-talk is so important. And I just realized this. Self-talk is so important, and like continuously reminding yourself, yeah, give yourself the hug, the pat, everything, because we're all trying our best. We're trying to get somewhere. I still have imposter syndrome. I literally bet my partner $500 that I wouldn't even get an interview with UCSF. So like, to be honest, thankfully he didn't take my money, but still like, it's still ingrained in me. Like I still have that idea that I'm not gonna amount to much, but still it's just that self-talk. I still tell myself, look at your cohort members. No offense to my cohort members. No offense to them, but a lot of them have like parents who are doctors. They come from very well-off families. And I just sit there when they ask like, oh, what do you do this? I'm just sitting there like, what am I supposed to say? Or like, what do your parents do? I'm like, my dad's a taxi driver. My mom doesn't work. So it still pops up, but it's still like, I still made it here. Like reminding myself, I made it this far. Even in college, I was like, I made it to college. Like that's huge. No one in my family did that. Self-talk is important, basically, and just like Luis said, comparing yourself does nothing except hurt you. We will still do it, but still like reminding yourself, okay, this, and that. Like be kind to yourself, basically. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Something that I used to remind myself when I struggled in undergrad was just reminding myself that I was in that room alongside all these other people as well. Like I made it in, and that I shouldn't feel like I'm behind because we're still here at the same level, and it just kind of depends on where we go from here. Miguel?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like imposter syndrome, especially intersected with education, has like been something that I feel like has plagued me my whole life. I mean, I think especially just with my journey, my family moved a lot growing up, and so I was like, especially in elementary school, I was constantly like every year going to a new school, like being the new kid in the block, always being doubted, always wanting to be like labeled as like a special needs child. In fact, I remember in like third grade in like a parent teacher conference, one of the teachers said to my mom that like, why is he even in school? Like, should he worry about that? Which is like wild to say to a kid. Um, and I think really, it really started, at least in terms of like healing with this process, so was I guess throughout high school where I went to high school in Sacramento. And my mom, she cared deeply about education, even though she wasn't able to have it herself. Sent me to one of the best public schools that they could find, basically like faking my address so I could be in that nice school district. And obviously I was the minority in a lot of ways. And always doubted upon. I mean, it's like those like subtle things of like everybody forming a study group around you, but not wanting to invite you, or, when I try to invite myself, being told that like, oh, it's already full, or like, X reason X, Y, or Z of why you can't join. And so like really just like having to like be isolated in a lot of ways throughout my life. And I think, I guess the last anecdote about my high school journey was that like, in terms of all of my peers, I was kind of like looked down upon coming to SF State in a lot of ways, because I was going to people that like were going to Harvard, to Berkeley, to Stanford, all these big name schools, quote unquote. And like I'm just going to SF State, and that's like how it was seen with like even the few friends that I had there. I actually don't really talk to anybody from my high school anymore. But it actually was healing in a lot of ways to come to SF State and like be reminded of like what it's like to like educate yourself with like your community, and like I feel like imposter syndrome was there in a lot of ways, but I feel like I was really glad that it wasn't there because of my background, the fact that I, am Latino and look brown. And so I feel like that was like really healing. And I feel like coming to UCSF, I actually like got nervous because I was the minority again. It was actually really weird starting out at UCSF, where I realized I'm the minority, and kind of like what Nabeela was saying, like all of my cohort mates like had their journey paved for them, in the sense of like a lot of the peers that we go to school with, like, have family that works at UCSF or are scientists or like have all of these privileges, and so like it makes sense why they're there. They had all the resources to be there. And, here I am, like I didn't even study biology, and I'm in a biology PhD program. So like I really felt like I knew nothing. It was kind of scary. Um, but then over time, I think I quickly realized that um, kind of going back to comparison, that like not that comparison is good, but I think comparison is um, like we need to be proud of ourselves, because like we had everything working against us and we're still here. Like I think it actually makes our achievements more valuable than the people that had their destiny laid out for them in some ways. And I think that's really how it changed. And then intersecting that with my SF State identity of like realizing like the superpower I have in wanting to actually care about inclusivity and like bringing good into the world and like inspiring change, which is not something that is shared at UCSF, outside of like, these groups that, at least the four of us surround ourselves with. But in general, I think there's like so much more that I bring to a table than somebody who's from Harvard or Stanford, where it's like, yeah, they might be really smart, quote unquote, but they actually don't know how to like apply it to the real world, or like to be a human, to have conversation. I think there's just like so many things sometimes where I feel every day I'm like, damn, like I'm actually so glad I went to SF State, and like so proud of my journey to get to where I am. And I know I'm not like talking directly about imposter syndrome, but I guess I just want to share that to kind of just say that I feel like my whole life I felt like an underdog until I got here. And I'm just like really thankful for that, because I think it makes you realize that like that feeling of doubt's never going to go away. But I think as you get older, you just kind of learn how to cope with it and realize that like we all feel this way, and it's never going to change. But like our attitude to like navigating it will.
Yeah, I think when we talk about comparison, we think we compare all the good that others do, but we don't really compare the similar struggles that someone might be going through that you can relate to on. And I think it's also speaks a lot to you being an alumni from SF State and having SF State students see you at UCSF and seeing that it is possible for them to go to make that jump from CSU and breaking through that stigma. So thank you, Miguel, for being here. Jasmine?
Yeah, so I think I'm like the only non-California person. But for those of you who are not familiar with Oregon, um, it's very white, and there's historical reasons for that. But yeah, so a lot of my peers were also very privileged. A lot of them were like coming from like California specifically, and like these are the people that like, I don't know, just went there because like again, they're privileged and their parents could pay for it. Whatever, they didn't look like me. So for me, definitely felt imposter syndrome basically my whole life. Even when I was in high school, I remember me and my sister, who's 1 year younger, we were always like the only Mexicans for like the entirety of like high school. We also like grew up like in a small town. And then U of O, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to college and it's gonna change. There's gonna be diversity. And then I go and it's the same and it's worse. And then I realized like throughout college, oh, actually, like there's a reason that there's no people that look like me. And I also like met other people who were just discouraged, and discouraged specifically from STEM. Because like, yeah, I mean, to be honest, when I was in these like classes with these very privileged white people, they often like didn't believe in my abilities. Like we would work together on like, I don't know, some class discussion, and I would say, oh, I think this is the answer. And like 90% of the time I was right, but they would just dismiss me. They would be like, no, I don't think that's right. So those kinds of experiences throughout college really made me doubt myself, and made me feel like, well, maybe this isn't for me, or like maybe I am dumb. Like even though, right, like there was evidence that I wasn't dumb, I was made to feel that way a lot by just like the environment I was in. So yeah, it was rough. Definitely still feel imposter syndrome. And yeah, I mean, just to again echo everything you all said, probably like doesn't get better. You just learn to cope. And yeah, I mean, I knew that a lot of these people were not going through the same thing as me, right? So my background is I'm also first gen daughter of like immigrant family, single mother. I'm the oldest of three. So I know like they're just they didn't have the same journey. Their parents laid out like everything for them. They said, you do this, you do that, here's a connection, you shadow this person, and you get where you need to go. And for us, like we all have like different unique journeys, but I think like my internship in like Germany was kind of random. It's kind of random, but it was really cool. And if I hadn't done it, I would have never decided maybe to do research, or maybe I would never had like an opportunity, because like at my home university, before I studied abroad, I didn't really have like clear ways of navigating the research world, or I didn't know how to do it. But once I was in Germany, I just like cold turkey emailed PIs and I was like, hey, I'm here from the US and I want to try research. And some of them responded. But yeah, I think one thing that I was surprised about, actually coming from somewhere that's like less diverse, is that I expected UCSF to actually be more diverse. I was like, it's California, gonna be more diverse. But yes, turns out it's still like, you still do have to be pretty privileged to be in grad school at a place like UCSF. So yeah, I was shocked when I came here and that wasn't the case. um, yeah, so definitely still happens. But we're navigating it. And the good thing is, you know, yeah, we find each other, like all four of us, we like find ways to kind of like, I say like it keeps me grounded, like being in community with other people. Yeah, because just to give you an example, one time I met with a professor and he was just like casually asking me questions like, oh yeah, and like, what's your family background? I was like, oh, like my mom, like she works at a restaurant. And he thought I meant my family owns a restaurant. And I was like, no, sir, like, no, we don't own the restaurant. Um, so it's very interesting being at UCSF now with this, but yeah.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I think one of the biggest takeaways is that like imposter syndrome is something that we may not really ever get over or stop dealing with. And it's kind of just like you said, finding community and being able to find your groundfulness and being proud in your own accomplishments and why you are where you are. Were you gonna say something, Julia?
No, I was just going to move to the next
Go
question,
ahead.
and it ties into just what you mentioned. Finding community is a huge part of being able to survive, right? And you all mentioned SACNAS and how it brought you all together, and also how it was an intentional choice by you all to find people who look like you and how important it was in shaping your trajectory, right? And I think a lot of people don't recognize that community and representation are a huge part of mental health as well, right? That impacts how we move in society and how we move day to day. So since mental health is an important aspect of grad school that is often overlooked, even if we work at public institutions that talk about mental health all the time, could you discuss some strategies or resources that have helped you prioritize self-care and manage stress during your grad studies? Did you want to go? Let's go in a random order. Jasmine, would you like to go?
Yeah, I can start. So I'm a very firm believer of like self-care. So I always like tell myself if I'm not in the right like mental state, then I won't be able to do work efficiently. So if I need extra sleep, I will do it. Sleep extra so that I can focus in lab, because what is the point of doing like an experiment wrong just because you're not in the right mental space and then waste another day doing it, right? I also did start therapy in grad school. And I think that's really helpful too. Because before that, I just didn't have like the resources to be able to do it. So that's definitely helped me a lot. Yeah, I think those are the two things I would say, like just taking care of myself, making sure I'm eating right, going to the gym. I go to the gym like every day. Yeah, so just making sure you're taking care of your needs first before you do anything else, because it does matter. And you know, maybe it's worth taking even an extra longer like a longer PhD if it means I'm taking care of my health and my body. Like you only have one body, right? So yeah.
I think those are all important lessons that college students in particular learn the hard way. And as first gen, for sure the hard way, even if I'm telling my students, you know, if you've been stuck on this one sentence for 3 hours, that was way too long. If you've reread the same thing 10 times and you have no idea what it said, again, you're stuck. You'll need to pace yourself, walk away, take a break, take those naps. And they'll laugh, you know, and they're like, it's not a big deal, I'll be fine, until their body crashes or until they haven't slept in 24 hours, right? And then they realize, oh, I probably, you know, should have prioritized my health. You know, collapsing during breaks is so common. Getting super sick is really common. or penting things up, right? Like we don't have access to therapy like a lot of other people, and therapy is it's a privilege, right? It's expensive. Even if schools have it, they have limited number of appointments that you can utilize before they're like, go figure it out yourself, right? So Nabeela, did you want to go next?
I can go next. Big love that, Jasmine, you took care, you like think of self-care a lot. I do not. I'm very, 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 very bad at taking care of myself. Like I will ignore anything that has to do with me and try to take care of everyone around me. Very bad. But the last year and a half, I have gotten a lot better at it. So I still want to pat myself on the back. Something that helped me incorporate self-care into like my daily life is scheduling. I'm a big scheduler. Love my Google Calendar. Don't know why. Just probably because trauma childhood. I like organization. So I really love organizing my calendar and everything. So I would put the gym in my calendar. And even if my mentor asked me, which was really hard for me because I don't say no to anyone, even when he would ask me that, oh, can you do this experiment real quick, like for me, or like do that? And I had the schedule of the gym on my Google Calendar, I'd be like, I have something right now that I can't miss. So I literally just say that to him because it's true. I can't miss it. Bad mental health. I was applying to MD PhD. It was a terrible process. And so like that's what I did. So scheduling helped me. It's not going to help everyone. I also, mental health is important. I think the last 6 months I lost like a family member, like due to mental health. So I think it was like a wake up call for me. Like the last 7 months, like, okay, like I need to care for myself. If I don't care for me, how am I going to care for my brothers? I have 5 brothers. 4 of them are younger. Yeah. So I love my brothers so much. And I always try my best to take care of them. And I told myself, if I'm gone, who's going to take care of them? So that kind of helped push me too. Should not be the only reason you take care of yourself, but if you need that little nudge and that push, it helps. I'm reading a book right now called Fierce Self-Compassion. Let's see if it helps me at all. So we'll see. Yeah, it's really hard, but just doing one little thing to take care of yourself to start off and then trying to incorporate it in your daily schedule. It's very difficult. When I started school, it was also even more hard because I was like, dang, I'm studying for like 12 hours a day. Terrible. So like making sure that schedule or that you take care of you first before you take care of anything else. It's hard yet again, but we can try.
We talk a lot to our students about gap semesters, gap years, and the biggest concern is always, I'm going to be behind. And you're like, behind compared to who? Right. So thank you so much for sharing about, prioritizing mental health, especially if it means taking time off, and that there's no shame about it. It's you are in that moment recognizing that there's something you need to do. It's the healthiest choice for you, right? And for those around you. Luis?
I'll second organization a lot, like Nabeela said. I was very disorganized in undergrad. I would just study a lot. I wouldn't recognize that point where you're reading, but you're just not absorbing anything anymore. You think you push past it and you keep learning, but you don't. It wasn't until I worked in like the pharmaceutical industry where everything's like so clean cut, like the research, because my life revolves around the science I'm doing. It's like so clean cut before like 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And everything just has to fit in that day because once 4 p.m. leaves, nobody touches anything science related. And so like working in that environment like set me up kind of to succeed here at once I got to UCSF. That's how I kind of like set up my stuff. And so like my mental health is like prioritized like immediately after 4 p.m. pretty much. But that's like the only way I could kind of like be forced to organize my life around that too. And I'd say that I think people like talking and like socializing with people is like really, really like good for me. I'm like a huge advocate of like doing stuff with SACNAS or doing stuff in the community. And it's so fulfilling to me. It's like science is like one half of me and that's like the other half. And I try to do like a lot for that. You know, I've like worked with like high school students in like underserved high schools. And like very recently I've like run into them in like the wild and like in real life outside of school. And they're like, oh wow, it's like so cool that you come to our school to talk about science. And I was like, wow, that's like insane, you know, that I wish I could have had that, you know. And it's like so it's like all the work that I kind of put into that, it's like so kind of being put back, and it's very self-healing to like see that the science I'm doing is cool and stuff, but like it actually means something, you know, to someone. And yeah, when I'm not doing science or anything like that, I like to cook a lot. I cook for my friends all the time. I cook for myself, like things I want to eat, not just to like survive. And it's very, very, I mean, it's just so good to like eat healthy and stuff like that. And so that's how I mainly kind of prioritize that. And I'd say that I kind of like try to bring that to UCSF also. So like through our SACNAS chapter, we've done like general meetings, and they're just kind of generally to like bring people together. But I think last year we had one where I brought a mental health specialist to talk about imposter syndrome a little bit. And that was really, really cool. We kind of had like set up a safe space just to talk about like skills and resources at the school. But I think one of the more powerful ones was like one student who was Mexican had like posed this question to the mental health specialist. They were like, I might feel like my family doesn't support or like understand why I'm even here. And the mental health specialist actually didn't have anything to say, but the students, the peers kind of spoke up and kind of supported that person with their like their own experiences. And that was just like so powerful, and kind of like I like to kind of support that as much as I can.
A huge reason we're all here tonight is because Luis answered my email that I cold emailed him. So I'm very, very grateful. Miguel?
Yeah, I think I could just echo what everyone else has been saying, and just like I think having more control of like what your capacity is, because I think sometimes our mental health will come in like overbearing our capacity load for like what we actually have time for in a day. And I think that's really important. I'm also like very adamant about sleep. Like there is nothing in the world that'll make me do work past 6 p.m. Like but I'm also like a very adamant morning person. So like I would much rather like wake up early at 7 or 6 a.m. and do my work rather than like stay up later. Um, Even as an undergrad, I was pretty adamant about that. Um, I love sleep. I try to get at least 7 hours is kind of like my sweet spot to get in a day. Um, but yeah, I think in terms of like other things, I think I care a lot about just like my community around me, especially being first gen and being like the only scientist in my family, really. I think it's like it's always really humbling to like think about my problems in the context of like some of the problems that my family go through, especially when like, they just, are working jobs that, actually really suck, I think sometimes it gives me perspective. Not that what we do is not hard either, but in some ways I always just feel so privileged getting to do what I do day in and day out, and to get to like have this path that I've created for myself. And so I think it's always important to like ground myself and realize that like, and sometimes like these are kind of like the nice problems to have in a lot of ways. And I don't know if that's like always the best mentality to approach something, but I think that has like really helped me. And honestly, I think all of that too, and not to make my I'm kind of an open book sometimes for the people that do know me, but I think like I think it had to be like my first week of grad school. I actually got in like a really near fatal car accident that like sent me to the hospital, and like I was like really like hurt. Um, I like couldn't walk for a couple weeks, and I was actually thought I was gonna lose my ability to walk. It was like that scary. And I think that like actually like coming back then to like school and all the like the orientation stuff and like all the like dumb classes you take, I think made me realize like how much of it doesn't actually matter in a lot of ways. And it's like, yeah, like, as long as you pass, like your degree's gonna look the same, and I think it's like with that attitude that really like propelled me through grad school, and like always prioritizing my mental health. Um, I think the last aspect that I think is like the most valuable outside of these anecdotes that I've shared is like, so maybe to give some background for people who don't understand how PhD programs work, especially the ones that we have. You start off doing rotations. So your first year of your PhD, you actually will rotate in 3 different labs. And then at the end of your first year, you'll choose the lab you're going to do your thesis in. You'll spend like the next 4 to 5 years doing research for. And I think I really prioritized not just the science that I wanted to do, but like who I was choosing to lead me. And again, going back to that car accident, I was rotating in the lab that I ended up joining. And I remember sending him that email like on the hospital bed, like, sorry, I can't make it to class today, or I'm like can't do anything, like I'm in the hospital. And I remember like he emailed me back immediately telling me not to worry about anything. He was like, take all the time you need to heal, like you'll get back to this when you're ready, like just worry about your health. And I think that like was really valuable to me at the time and showed me like the kind of character that my advisor was. And yeah, I think that like really propelled me to like want to be in his lab and to like be on the path that I am now. And I think, you know, after 4 years of working with him, it's like he showed me like how much he actually mattered about like my own growth versus like the growth of like him and his career. And I think that like that's helped my mental health tremendously, is to like have someone who's like not always giving me deadlines to finish something by, but like rather like wanting to help develop and nurture my growth. And I actually remember the first year I joined his lab, and like I was taking a summer break because you still have to work in summers in grad school. I don't know if they tell you that, but and so I was like gonna take a week off, and I remember telling him about it, and he was like, "You should take 2 weeks off." And I was like, "Oh, like I could do that." He was like, "Yeah." He was like, "You're not gonna get a vacation with 1 week. Like you need at least 2 weeks to like fully relax." And I just like always remember that conversation of like, you know, and then now I have the relationship I do with him now where I get to pretty much call my own vacations, which I think is great. You know, especially that like you're not counting hours in grad school. You just get paid one stipend each month. So it's not like you're losing pay. Like you could take a couple months off if you really wanted to, and you know, not I mean, I don't know if that's true, but um, you know, I think so yeah, I think to kind of like bring it full circle, I think, you know, really being smart about the spaces you choose to enter when you have the ability to is like really important, because that I think like your bosses and your leaders and your mentors play a huge role in your career, in your life, and your mental health. And I think like if you're already starting off on up a wrong foot with someone who has expectations that don't align with yours, then your mental health's never going to be aligned. Your mental health's never going to be good.
All right. So thank you so much, Miguel, for sharing. I think now that we are at 7, we're gonna go into maybe just 1 or 2 individual questions now, a little bit specifically about each and every one of your experiences. I guess let's see. We'll start off with Luis, because I want to ask this question because I'm very curious about your field specifically. Luis, you mentioned you working in the pharmaceutical industry before pursuing your PhD. But I want to know exactly, and maybe some students don't know, what exactly is pharmacogenomics? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, that's right.
And how did you even discover that field?
Yeah. So I guess so I mentioned, since I started being interested in science, I was specifically interested in like what medicines do, like why are there like generic is like the same thing as a brand name? Like what do these names mean? And so I finished undergrad, and I had to find a job, and this I applied to like a bunch of places, but this place seemed pretty interesting. So it's called LabCorp. LabCorp is like a huge multinational company. You probably know them from like blood drawing, but they actually buy small biotech companies and do like specific things. And so they actually in Wisconsin bought this company called Covance, and it's called a contract research organization. So these pharmaceutical companies, AstraZeneca, Amgen, whatever, they have drugs and they need to have specific tests done to be like submitted to the FDA. And instead of themselves doing it, they give it to this contract research organization to do those studies. And so that's what I was kind of doing. And that's kind of like where I learned that so they give you all sorts of different drugs, and they have tests for like animal studies to see how they break down in like live animals. How efficient are they, and like are there like specific like interactions, like side effects that are supposed to be like studied. That's all done before drugs get to the FDA. And so I was kind of working on all that, and I kind of like this whole field was new to me, but specifically there's these kind of enzymes called cytochrome P450s. And so they break down all drugs. And this company was like the FDA has this guideline for like specific genetic types or subtypes of these enzymes. And I was like, whoa, so we don't all have the exact same enzymes, and we actually don't. So different people from through evolution, we come from different parts of the world, and we've developed kind of like our enzymes work to different levels, and that affects how drugs get broken down in our bodies. And that pretty much summarizes pharmacogenomics. Is your genetic background determines like how efficient or how much side effects of a drug will happen. And so that's kind of where I learned exactly that that's even a thing, you know? And so I kind of like learned it from the practical sense before like the actual like theory and stuff like that. So then I was like, okay, so pharmacogenomics is a thing. I'm interested in drugs still. Let's like see what programs. And so here at UCSF, my program's pharmaceutical sciences and pharmacogenomics. So specifically, the curriculum is looking at how those are kind of like being looked at. How's your genetic makeup being used? The research is like focused around like a lot of that. Like labs are using you can get your whole genome like sequenced through like DNA ancestry and 23andMe and stuff like that. And so you can actually pull that information down and start looking at these things to see how they affect drugs. And so that's kind of like broadly what I'm kind of interested in. And I didn't know it existed until I started, like the day one I started that job. So yeah, and people are probably going to be hearing more and more about it, you know, as like the technology advances. So there'll be people like me to keep it in control, to wrangle with AI. So yeah.
Great, thank you so much. All right, do you want to switch around some questions, Julia, or do you want to do two each? Okay, so all right, I'll give you another one, Luis. So how did your industry experience influence your decision to transition to academia, and what advice would you have to students who are considering a similar transition?
Yeah, so I thought when I knew I wanted to go to grad school out of undergrad, but I thought the pipeline, the way you do it is from undergrad, you go to grad school. Like I didn't know there was like a step between. So I was kind of like disoriented when I started that pharmaceutical company job. But I was doing like science that I love and stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, seriously considering. So they pay you a lot more in like doing pharmaceutical or industry research than they do in like in academia or like UCSF or anything. But I was actually kind of like surprised that once I was in that company, like a lot of my peers, even managers who are handling all these crazy drugs, don't have a PhD. They just have their undergrad, or they're just really like talented. And I was like, so then what's the point of like grad school then if like these people are like around me? But then I kind of like slowly kind of like started seeing like that to like make actual change in like science and like the field, stuff like that, you kind of have to lead the science. And to get to that point, you need like really, really specific training in like the science. And that's kind of when I saw that I was like learning all these kind of cool science techniques and stuff in industry. But I still wanted to kind of make actual change eventually, like in like pharmacogenomics or like something else drug related. And the way to do that is to keep going to school and get this like really, really high training. So like if you're kind of working this, you can like advance, but there's always kind of a cap of like the roof that you're gonna hit, because they just kind of value this piece of paper a little more. So that's like the main reason I kind of like wanted to pursue graduate schools. Like, okay, so I know what the real world like science is like in school, they teach you. Now I know what the real world science kind of looks like. Now let's go back and see where I can like step in and keep doing these things that I like.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
All right, let's move on to Jasmine. All right, let's see. All right, so you already talked about Germany, so maybe I'll talk about that one. Can you discuss some of your most intriguing findings or implications in your current research right now during on the macro-host interactions during intestinal injury and repair?
Yeah, so I'm kind of early stage PhD. Like I joined my lab semi recently, and right now I'm preparing for my qualifying exam, which is basically like the time that we write up our whole like proposal of like, this is what I'm going to do. These are the things I'm going to do for my whole PhD. So, but I can tell you generally, like why it's important to do the work that I want to look at. And I guess like its implications in like healthcare and potentially having, finding like treatment options. So, thank you. It's very stressful, Nabeela. Anyway, yeah, so I'm generally studying intestinal regeneration. So there's a lot of cell turnover in everyone's intestines. And actually, fun fact, I fell in love with like the digestive system when I was like in high school. I don't know why. Like some people think neuroscience is cool. I like learned about the gut and I was like, I love that. I love the nutrient absorption. I was just like, I don't know, I was hooked. But anyway, like kind of forgot about it for a while, but it's just a fun fact. Anyway, I was always interested in kind of like how microbes are, which are everywhere on your body, are interacting with the host. So I've always like generally had this interest, and I knew from undergrad that this is what I wanted to study. So in my current lab, nobody really does a lot of the microbiome stuff, but we're like experts in stem cells and like regeneration in general, and specifically like in the gastrointestinal tract. So me and one other postdoc are kind of trying to determine how the microbiome might be actually enhancing the regenerative properties of the epithelium, which is like the intestinal barrier. And so there's patients that have different damage to the intestine, and some of it is chronic. So for those of you that are familiar with inflammatory bowel disease, this is like a chronic inflammatory disease that also has this component of basically like barrier disruption that is never recovered or healed. So the hope is that by studying how some microbes that are beneficial are helping to restore the barrier, that then you can find treatments or like probiotics that can be used as treatments for those patients. So yeah, that's all I can tell you for now, but I don't have data yet. I have like preliminary data. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. And then you've been involved in science communication and education throughout your academic journey. How has this involvement enriched your graduate experience so far?
Yeah, so I think like as I mentioned earlier, it really is like grounding for me and important for me to do this work. Because if I don't do it, it's easy to get kind of like lose sight, right? Like again, you kind of get lost being in the environment where like, again, you're like full of like privileged people and like experiments suck sometimes, okay? Like it's a reality, but yeah, like some of the stuff is not working out, or like I don't know, the people you work with are in a bad mood, they treat you bad, stuff like that happens. And it's easy to lose sight of like why you're here, right? So for me, I wanted to be a professor. I don't know if I would still do, but I wanted to be a professor so that I could like be in a position where I could teach other people and encourage other like specifically like Latinas and like people of color to pursue science. And also, of course, I love science. So I thought like I'm gonna be a professor. So yeah, I think like doing like community outreach and talking about science in an accessible way, also by being a person of color and communicating that, helps other students be like motivated, or I mean, at least I hope. I definitely worked for me. So yeah, it's like essential for me to do it. I always feel amazing after I talk to students. And I love when they ask questions, or they're engaged, or they have similar backgrounds or similar stories. Yeah, I hope it helps them too.
Y'all are too cool for me. I don't know how to handle this. And I thank you all for breaking down everything in a way that even I could understand as a non-science major. Clearly all of your communication skills are excellent. Okay. And if y'all are educators, like the world would be 10,000 times better. Okay. Miguel. Okay. The first question for you, your research focuses on genomic technology disparities in forensics and medicine. I know so many students are interested in forensics right now because of all the TV shows, right? What inspired you to pursue this area of study, and how do you hope your work will contribute to addressing some of these disparities?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. I mean, I think on the forefront, my passion for this started coming to SF State, being at a school where we take classes in ethnic gender studies, women and gender studies. You know, we have to think so critically about our place in the world as underrepresented people. Um, I think it always grounded me in like wanting to do something in this space, being able to like do something meaningful and make it like for our people and our communities. And this actually got started like in the forensics work that I did. That was the undergrad lab that I was in here at SFSU, was like using computational approaches to look at disparities in forensic technology, where our lab thinks about that through many perspectives, with the overarching theme of like, we know that these technologies are getting more and more popular, especially this process called genealogical searching, or being able to like find suspects through their distant ancestors. So like being able to like find a match of like a second cousin, and then being able to like reconstruct the pedigree to identify a suspect of interest. And like this is a really cool technology, and I think is going to be very transformative in being able to identify people, especially, you know, when you think about all of the cold cases that exist. But there's still so much we don't know about how accurate these tools are. And when you actually look into the studies that assess them, you know, there are, you know, maybe a few studies that exist, and maybe it wouldn't surprise you to know that all of the studies that do exist are only tested on white people or people with European ancestry. And so there's actually like nothing that's really known about how these tools work when you want to actually look at using diverse populations, looking at diverse groups of people, um, wanting to understand how genetic ancestry plays a role into that, which is completely different than the race of a person. And I could talk forever about the differences between race, genetic ancestry, and your ethnicity, but we only have so much time today. Um, and so that's really what grounded me, is like being able to like do research that had like a societal impact for us and just for everybody, really. I mean, I think it's important to know, even for white people, how accurate these tools are, because the studies that do exist are not the most well thought out. And so that's actually what like led me to UCSF, is like, you know, seeing the biological connection, seeing the social implications of our research, and me kind of realizing like, oh, like, what about medicine? Like, what do we know about disease, and especially like the genetic architecture of disease? And I think Luis touched on it like extensively in the pharmacogenomic aspect, but I think I came to UCSF wanting to like understand the basic science of how we look at these mechanisms across groups of people, and you know, to realize how abysmal it is there too, in terms of like how many studies exist where that look at diverse groups of people. And in fact, there was like this study that came out a year or two ago that showed that like all of the studies that like look to associate like individual genes to disease, only 1% of the total studies that exist are done on Latino individuals, which is like devastating. You know, it's devastating to hear that like, you know, we're getting so close to precision medicine, being able to like understand the full genetic basis of disease and being able to like build these prediction models to you know, understand people's risks to certain disease, and to realize like it doesn't work for us, you know. And a lot of the reason why in some ways is like, to kind of speak it very broadly, is, you know, a lot of the time people are lazy to do the math that's needed to really look diversely. And I think that's kind of like what then got me into it. And honestly, now that I've like dipped my toe in, like, it's just like something I want to spend my life doing, because I think you might need a lifetime to be able to make a lot of these technologies that exist equitable for everyone.
I remember pretty recently, there was a story of a young Black student who I think did the illustrations for a medical school textbook or something like that, based on how certain diseases look on Black bodies, and how symptoms can look entirely different than what we've all known them to be, just because most of the textbooks use white bodies to illustrate things and have only been studied on white bodies, right? So thank you for sharing the work that you're doing, and also the intentionality. I feel like all of you are in your particular fields for a very specific reason, whether you knew it or not. And I love that it's going to create such incredible ripple effects later on. Thank you. And a follow-up question: as someone dedicated to advancing equity and inclusion in science, what initiatives do you believe are the most effective in creating more diverse and inclusive scientific communities?
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, this was probably the question that I pondered the most that you proposed to me. And I think I kind of have to start with, I'm not really too sure. I mean, I think it's something that I'm still learning myself. And I think that like, in a lot of ways, I'm thankful to have come to UCSF, because I think out of most of the universities that I've seen with my own two eyes, like, they do the best job at trying to make science and medicine more inclusive. I say that very vaguely because, you know, they fail in a lot of ways too. And I think it's still important to recognize that they're an institution, an academic institution. And so, yeah, I don't really know what are some effective initiatives that really can bring change. And honestly, it's something that I'm desperately trying to learn. Something that I really haven't mentioned yet, but is also really important to my grad school journey, is a fellowship program that I'm a part of through the HHMI Gilliam. It's a medical institution in the East Coast. I didn't hear about it until I applied for it also, so I don't really know too much about or I guess what I'm trying to say is this fellowship was meant to help aspiring leaders in science, for underrepresented people, to make science a more inclusive space. And it's honestly been a program that I'm like so thankful to have been a part of, that I'm still a part of. And I think the biggest thing that they taught me and that I've learned is the ability of being leaders in advancing this. And I think the reason I say that kind of goes back to my own journey. And what I've talked about today is the fact that I think a lot of my success has been like putting myself in good environments. And I think in a lot of ways, that's usually where things go wrong, is when you don't put yourself in a good environment. And so, you know, it's like, it's why we have these systemic problems, is that we don't have enough of us in these spaces. you know, and I think that's really the biggest difficulty is like being able to like be advised by people with similar identities, or to like have a big group of people that share your identity so you're not alone facing these challenges by yourself. And, you know, I think there's like, you know, this big thing of like, oh, well, like schools like are accepting, or I guess actually, let me take a step back. I think a good analogy that I like to think of is like Latinos acceptance rates into the UC systems. Talking about undergrads in the sense where they really pride themselves off having the most, like they accept the most Latinos into their undergrad institutions compared to like any other school or system, but they do such a terrible job at keeping them and retaining them. And I think in fact, we also have like the largest dropout rates of Latinos due to the simple nature that, you know, you could do all you can to just try to get as many people as you can into the door, but if you don't give them the resources and the tools to succeed, then you're never really going to get there. And so I think it's really important to like cultivate a good environment. And honestly, that's something that I desperately do, is just to like have a nice environment wherever I go, just try to be a positive light, just try to make everybody feel included. And I think the best example of that has been the research lab that I'm in. I was actually the first student in my PI's labs, since they were rebuilding it at the time. And I think really like what has made me the most proud is the fact that I get to like be a leader and set the tone of the culture in the lab, and just to like really be a nice, like, just to be really accepting, and I think to just be inclusive to everybody. And, you know, I like do my best to like have a personal relationship with everybody in our group. And I think that's been helpful. And I mean, I don't know the demographics of all the labs at UCSF, but I think our lab does a really good job at cultivating diversity, where we have people like from the US, not from the US. We have Filipino scientists, we have Black scientists, we have Latina scientists, Latino scientists, we have white people. Like, I think we cultivate like a really good culture, and I think it's definitely something that I've been proud to help cultivate, as well as having a bunch of people from SF State in our lab too. So I think I'm a little proud of that as well. So yeah, I would just narrow it down to like just presence being here, and making sure that everybody that does come my way, that I do the best I can to support them however they need to be supported.
I think you bring up such an excellent point about how institutionally there is an incredibly long way to go when it comes to actually creating equitable and inclusive spaces, right? Because a lot of times it is just numbers for them, right? But at the individual level, so many first gen, what I'm really proud of is when they get to open a door, they do their best to keep that door open. And so each of you in the spaces that you are in, even if you think you're a small little ant in this mountain, your presence alone is moving that mountain, moving the finish line. It is creating a different reality for students that they might not have ever imagined, right? And hopefully, like, we'll keep building up that momentum. And then our last person, Nabeela. Okay. As a first-year MD PhD student, you have a unique perspective on the intersection of medicine and research. You're doing the absolute most. How do you envision integrating these two aspects of your training into your future career? And what opportunities or challenges do you anticipate?
Very good question. I will try. If I don't answer a particular part, please call me out, or call me in, and I will answer those parts. I love, one of my professors would say, call me in. I love the switch. Yes. Okay. So I guess, how do I envision integrating both? So I actually ultimately started college, and I was like, oh, I guess being a doctor, let me go into medicine, as many students do, because we don't know. So I came in and I was like, okay, medicine's what I want to do. I volunteered a lot in healthcare settings. I loved patient interaction, and I really loved being able to like use specific personal experiences to connect with patients, and then just talking through why they hate the healthcare system, because I do too. I know I'm going into it, still despise it. And so that was really nice. I never wanted to let that go. And ultimately, I figured out what an MD PhD was. I had a professor who actually dropped out of Harvard's UCSF's MD PhD. I used to think it was Harvard's, but actually it was UCSF's. He decided research was what he wanted to do. It was the same professor who kept me from dropping out. And he introduced me to it. He was like, you seem to really want to work on very applicable questions to human applicable questions in terms of research. I did a lot of milk production work as an undergrad, like understanding how the breast forms, understanding how milk is produced and how we can increase it. And so I was really interested in questions that specifically linked to human experiences. And so the way I see the MD PhD working together is I truly believe I want to be a professor. That can change. And I do switch back and forth because academia is very hard and not built. Getting into academia as a person of color, especially like a first-gen student, like it's very difficult and just a lot on our plates. So I'm not sure yet, but ultimately I do see myself being a professor for 80% of my time. I want to run my own lab, but I still want to see patients approximately once a week. So the way I see this connecting is I do research, I see patients tell me what's wrong, they have a certain disease. I'm interested in neurodegeneration, so specifically probably around that can change as well. Yet again, things change all the time. And so the way I see it is like, oh, they have these symptoms. How can I apply that to my research? How can I answer how we can tackle these symptoms? How can we address specifically genetically what's happening to them? So I really do believe that having both training will help me understand, I believe, like the human body perspective and having that patient interaction, because it's like constant feedback. It's research. You constantly get research back by talking to patients, by seeing patients. And so I do really think that they would work really well together. Why I decided to be crazy and do an 8-year program, still question it every day, not gonna lie. I still question it every day. But yeah, that was kind of how I saw envisioned. Like they're both forms of research. One's more bench research, one's more in-person research, like patient interacting research. That's kind of how I saw it though.
I love that you get to take aspects of both worlds and kind of have them collide.
I also love that.
Now, as someone who found their current path a little while after completing their undergrad, what advice do you have for seniors, so college seniors, who are still uncertain about their next steps after graduation? This is probably, I think 3 or 4 students asked a very similar version of this question in the Q&A.
Take a gap year or 2 or 3 or 4. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself, as well as understand what you want to do in the future. Yet again, 8 years, long time. I took the 2 gap years because I was like, do I need to do, but like, do I really need this? Like, do I want this? And I wasn't 100% sure. Also COVID happened. I also lost like a lot of people around that time. And so I was just like freaking out. I didn't want to take the MCAT because they kept canceling all the dates. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure if I even want to do this. Let me go do more research in another field that I'm very interested in. And let's see if I enjoy this and continue doing healthcare stuff and see if I still enjoy that. So I ultimately had an idea of what I may wanted to do, like either a PhD in MD or an MD PhD. And I decided like to take that gap year to go do research and do stuff related to medicine and actually other stuff. Like I did outreach, I partnered with like education, basically I did other things as well, just to try to see like, is this really what I want to do? And ultimately those gap years were much needed. I got to support my family. I still got paid fine, not as much as industry paying jobs. I have a lot of regret not going into industry at first, but I was able to support my family still, like financially, and it was really nice. Like I did stuff I really enjoyed. I also made a lot of connections, so it's a time to make connections at UCSF. So I was part of the post-bac Propel at UCSF, and yeah, Miguel's PI actually is one of the directors for Propel. They're one of the founders, I believe. Yeah. But like I decided to do that, and it actually probably was the best idea I could have done. Like I needed time between, and I needed to figure out what I wanted to do. I needed to support my family, and I was like, why not? And here I am. I ultimately decided I did want to do an MD PhD. But take gap years. They're wonderful. Like I know people, like I actually was very scared about taking gap years because everyone's like, oh, you're just going to be, I actually got told this, you're just gonna be a failure. So like it's like, oh, you're not gonna actually go back or you're not gonna do that. And I was like, you don't tell me what to do. I push people to take gap years. It's really helpful and it helps you grow as a person and a scientist and whatever you want to do. Hope that answered.
Gap years are so important, getting practical experience, the praxis side of things, not just the theory is so important because it's about learning not only what you like, but also what you don't like. Equally important. Yes, Miguel, a lot of students who go straight into grad programs are like, I should have taken that time. And also that means you're hustling in your senior year trying to apply on top of finishing your undergrad. Like that's so intense. So thank you all for sharing. We want to make sure that if any of the students here in the chat would like to ask any questions, please leave your questions there. I know it's already past 7:30, so we'd like to make sure that our speakers get some time to, you know, rest up, eat well, go to the gym, take care of themselves. So if maybe Luis, if you don't mind, there are a couple really excellent Q&A questions that students submitted. Do you mind if I email them to you?
Yeah, of course.
Perfect. But any questions for our speakers from the students in the chat? Are you all suddenly shy?